Now, train drivers from the ASLEF union have reached a deal with the government that could finally bring an end to strike action that has at times crippled Britain's rail network. But at what cost? The deal, which could see train drivers receive a bumper pay rise of 14% over 3 years, is estimated to cost the Treasury a whopping £100 million. Well, they've only been in power a month and already Labour seem to be spending their way to popularity. So far, they've given away this. They've signed off a 5.5% rise for public sector workers that will cost us around £10 billion. They've also agreed a 22% increase for junior doctors, and that is estimated to sting us around £530 million. That's £500 million. So much for plugging that £20 billion black hole. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by GBNews political editor Chris Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. So Rachel Reeves was, at first, old Mother Hubbard, very, very prudent financially until they got in power. Now it seems that whichever union knocks at the door number 10 gets a bag of silver. So let's start with the trains.
It does feel that way. The trains deal is the most recent one. The train drivers, ASLEF union, they've been striking for the best part of 2 years over pay. They've been given a 15% pay rise over 3 years, taking average driver pay to £70,000 a year from £60,000 a year. Big increase. Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, says I wanted to move fast and fix things. Fair enough. She said the Tories were happy to see taxpayers pay the price as strikes dragged on and passengers suffered. It's easy spending money. It's harder saving money, and it's very hard attaching strings to deals. There's no strings attached here in this deal, the Tories say. Helen Whately, the Shadow Transport Secretary, no strings deal means that this will be paid for by passengers and by taxpayers, she says. It comes after, as you said there in that graphic, 22% pay rise for junior doctors, 5.5% pay rise for millions of public sector workers, £10 billion cost. There are choices being made here by this government that are going to cause issues for it. They've taken away the winter fuel payment from pensioners completely, at the same time as giving a pay rise to public sector workers, twice inflation. Inflation this week, 2.2%, set to go up to 2.75% later this year, and then 2% next year. That's where it should be. The Bank of England that's where its target is. So these pay rises are far greater. You heard earlier, though, from that former RMT General Secretary, your old friend there, Steve Headley, and he made the point that there's been 3% inflation in 19, 1.5% in 2020, 13.8% in 2022, 11.6% in 23. So over the piece, it's merely restoring pay to where it should be. That's what they would be arguing. But the worry is going to be that these double inflation pay rises going forward could have a bearing on inflation, and that's bad for all of us.
And in fact, Steve Headley astonishingly said that he would reject the £100 million, and that's when I said, a socialist not happy with £100 million of other people's money.
That's the point. You picked him up on that correctly, because where does it end? I mean, we have heard there's rumours that junior doctors might have another go next year. When will this government start to show a bit of steel on these pay offers? So far, they've had quite a good run of it.
And Louise Haigh, you mentioned there now, the Transport Secretary, sat in that very chair when she announced that the Labour Party wanted to nationalise the railways. Yeah. Does that mean that all of these pay rises will become a public liability, a public sector taxpayer liability?
I would argue they already are, Martin, given the state that they rely on the generosity of the public purse to run these services. What's going to happen is, as these franchises come to an end, they'll fall back into public ownership. So after 5 or 10 years, maybe, the entire network is back, as it used to be under British Rail before it became Railtrack, and then Network Rail was floated off. May work, it may not. I think it hasn't really worked, privatisation on the rail network. In the same way, it hasn't really worked with water companies. There's not enough competition.
Now, we're about to talk to the Taxpayers Alliance in a short while. Stick around for that, about where's this money going to come from. And another story I want to talk to you about was, if only we had a Prime Minister in place who'll be shouting and biting back about all this, but we don't. We seem to have Rishi Sunak, who's gone AWOL in Beverly Hills, and we have 6 anti-Faragists scrapping it out, and we won't know who's actually going to be taking these kind of battles until November, or they're going to get their act together and do it sooner.
November the 6th is a date. Now, there has been chatter today that they might bring that forward to before the October 30th budget, because we've had Rachel Reeves talking today about difficult choices, hinting at big tax rises in October 30th. Some campaigns wanted to have the winner selected of the 6 MPs trying to succeed Rishi Sunak by the October 30th, but I have been told by Bob Blackman, now won't be known to viewers necessarily, but he's the 1922 committee chairman, he's the returning officer on the entire contest. That will not happen, he says to me. They're going to get down to 2 candidates by about very early October, and then it's quite important that members get a long chance to have a look at those 2 final candidates. We'll bring it to all our viewers live on GB News.
Oh, Steve, there's a bumper pay rise, double the rate of inflation for train drivers today. You must be over the moon, mate.
Well, I don't know if you've looked at the figures for these 5 years. We'll start off in 2019 when inflation was 3%, RPI was 3%, 2020 1.5%, 2021 2.9%. 2022, a bumper 13.8%, and 2023, 11.6%. So you've got about 30% of a pay deduction because, of course, inflation goes up, real wages go down. And these drivers haven't had a pay rise in all that time. And what we have here is a recuperation of about 10% for those past wages, and a promise of 4.5% going forward for 1 year. So if you take that into calculation, people have lost about 15% of their wages. So I don't think it's a great deal at all. I think it's a terrible deal. And I think the ASLEF drivers should think long and hard about rejecting this deal.
So you think even though this pay rise today is double the rate of inflation, it's going to be locked in for the future?
That's just a ridiculous
this could
argument,
become, Steve, this could become a public liability if Louise Haig's plan to nationalise the rails comes into fruition. This is 100 million and rising. The public sector pay rises, 10 billion quid for teachers, NHS workers, junior doctors, a further £500 million. As we just said, 13 billion if you factor in the future pension liabilities. That's a black hole that dwarfs the black hole that Rachel Reeves invented. The simple question is this, Steve Hadley, how do we pay for this? Do we go down your old mate Jeremy Corbyn's allotment and dig up a magic money tree, or is it going to be inevitable tax rises?
Well, what we don't do is adopt your mate Liz Truss's policies, which car crash the economy and cut taxes for the rich. What you do is the absolute reverse of that. You make the rich pay fair taxes, close down the tax loopholes, make them pay. And let's get this straight, because you seem to have skipped over the fact that these drivers hadn't had a pay rise in 5 years. You seem to skip over the fact that inflation in that time comes to 30%. So it's not an above inflation pay rise. It's a half the inflation pay rise. So it's only a half of what inflation is. So they've taken a 15% cut in real terms, even with this deal. And we're now in this ridiculous situation that you're trying to pass it off as this year. It's a bumper pay rise. It's not a bumper pay rise. It hasn't.
Well, Steve, I'll put it to you. I'll put it to you that train drivers, form a hugely important job, but 70 grand is now the average salary. 70 grand. That's more than double the price of a school teacher, much more than double the price of a nurse. Train drivers are already sitting pretty. They get a public sector pension paid for by taxpayers. Are you seriously suggesting they should still reject this?
The train drivers, actually, a lot of them don't get a public sector pension at all. They work for train operating companies. So I think that you should check out your facts before making statements like that.
But they're about to nationalise the rails, Steve.
As you know, we've had a privatisation, disastrous privatisation. When those drivers went on strike by the government's own figures, it cost over £1 billion. Hugh Merriman, back in 2023, said it would have been far, far cheaper to settle the strikes than actually carry it on. And it was political intransigence on behalf of the Tory government that got us into this mess. So if you take 25 million on a weekday and 15 million on a weekend, that's what much the country costs the economy. It costs the economy for a train strike. So this could have been settled a long time ago and all that money saved. And it's an absolutely ridiculous argument. They argue that other public sector workers shouldn't get paid more. Of course they should. We should have doctors and nurses and all those public sector workers paid more, as we should in workers in general. And what will that mean? That will mean is a massive redistribution of wealth from the parasitic elite, like your boss, Rupert Murdoch, into the hands
Rupert Murdoch isn't my boss.
Workers. Sorry?
Rupert Murdoch has nothing to do with GBNews. You might want to check your facts, Steve.
He must be that other one. Who's your boss then? Some other parasite?
Not Rupert Murdoch.
Billionaire parasite, is it? Yeah, I'd imagine he's put on 70 grand a year anyway, is he? Or public sector money. I'd imagine he's
the chickens has that got to do with it? Let's stay on point about train drivers.
Putting away a lot of money every week.
Steve, Chris Hope here in the studio with Martin. Can I break into your chat there to ask a question? Your experience in industrial relations, do you think then that ASLEF members might turn this offer down, despite the fact it's twice inflation?
Well, it's not twice inflation. We've already explained that. They haven't had a pay rise in 5 years. If you add up the inflation over that time, it comes up to well over 30%. This doesn't even come to 15%. So it's a 15% real terms pay cut. So it's a ridiculous argument that you keep repeating that it's an above inflation deal. It's not above inflation deal. And I think that ASLEF workers would be very, very entitled to turn this deal down, because in real terms, they've taken a 15% pay cut, even if this is all factored in over those 5 years.
All right, Steve Headley, superb. £100 million for the people's money, and you're still not happy. The face of socialism. Thank you, Steve. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.